Everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for the CC Hall Renaming Forum. I am Ken DeShealy, Associate Vice President for Student Life and Senior Associate Dean of Students and the Chair of this task force. I'm joined today by many members of our CC Little Naming Task Force, and we'll ask them to introduce themselves now. We'll start with Harrison.
Hello, everyone. My name is Harrison Ransley, and I'm the president of the undergraduate student body and UMSG Incorporated.
Anila.
Hi, everybody. My name is Anila Karunakar. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the Director for Diversity and Inclusion at UMaine.
John Bear. John, I think you're on mute.
Hello, I'm John Bear Mitchell, and I'm the Wabanaki Center Outreach Coordinator.
Haley.
Hi, I'm Haley Cedar. I'm a fourth year history major here at UMaine.
Liam.
Hi, my name is Liam Reardon. I'm a professor in the history department at UMaine and have served on both the task force over the summer and the current one.
Kimberly.
Good afternoon. I'm Kimberly Whitehead, Vice President and Chief of Staff to the President. I'm happy to be here with you today.
Ameya.
Hi, I'm Ameya Karabarkar. I'm a fifth year grad student in the chemistry department. I'm also the Board of Trustee representative.
And John.
Good afternoon. I'm John Dieklenbacher-Kroll. I'm the Assistant Director for Research in the College of Natural Sciences, Forestry, and Agriculture.
Is there anyone on the task force that is otherwise joining that I have missed today? Lisa has joined us. So Lisa, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, I can. Hi, I'm Lisa Newman. I teach in anthropology and Native American studies at UMaine.
Excellent. Just a reminder that you can submit your questions to umaine.alerts@maine.edu or submit them in the chat. So please feel free to do that. I wanted to start today's open forum by sort of giving a recap of how we find ourselves here today. Back in the summer, as Liam made reference to, the president, Joan Farini Mundy, commissioned a CC Little Hall name task force. And that task force was charged with the following: deciding whether an individual's name should be removed from a physical facility named for them, recommend whether to remove Clarence C. Little name should be removed from the campus building bearing his name with pros and cons and rationale. And if we recommended the removal, please suggest alternate names or replacement names. And number 3, if a replacement name is recommended, what criteria would you consider for the name replacement? That group did its work over the summer and submitted its report on June 23rd of this year. You can find the complete report on the website that's been created for the CC Little Hall Name Task Force. You can find, again, the whole report there, which I would highly recommend that folks do. So the task force was named in furtherance or in compliance with the University of Maine Board of Trustee policy as it relates to the naming of physical facilities. That is Board Policy 803, the naming of facilities, which is calls for a president to commission a task force or committee to consider it. And that is exactly what President Farini Mundy has done. And so we have come to that point now where we presented our report to the president. She accepted it without change. And last week, we made a presentation to the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee to remove the name CC Little from the name on the building on campus. That was approved unanimously by the FFT committee, which every facility-related question must first go through the FFT committee before going on to the Board of Trustees. So now that issue of removing the name is slated for the agenda for the Board of Trustees meeting on September, I believe it's the 27th and the 28th. It might just be condensed to one date because of the Zoom format that it is adopting, but that's where we are today. The next stage, just to give a time frame into our work, is to recommend, because our current task force has been charged with identifying a name, a particular name or options, up to 3 options for the president. And so that's what we are charged with today. And this open forum is part of our information gathering in that and furtherance of that process. So we have a website, and there's an opportunity for folks to submit suggestions to that website, but there is also an opportunity through this open forum, which is why we're all here today. So I would like to, at this point, offer the opportunity for anyone that was on the first task force to maybe explain further some of the work that we did, if that's something they would like to do. Okay, not seeing anything there. I would like to lay out the timeline that the current committee is using to finish its work. Right now, we are looking to make our recommendations to President Farini Monday by September 25th. That would give the president approximately 1 week to select either from the recommendations we provide or not. She's not certainly bound by selecting a name from those that we might recommend as a group. But then in order for it to be considered by the Board of Trustees at their November meeting, it must first again go through the FFT committee. Agenda items for the October meeting of the FFT committee are due by October 1st. So that is the time frame. We are going to submit our report with recommendations by September 25th to President Farini Monday. If she wants it to be considered by the Board of Trustees at their November meeting, it must first be considered by the FFT committee to make their October meeting timeframe. That must be submitted by October 1st. So that's where we are today. And specifically, the charge of this current task force is to review the renaming criteria articulated through the 6 naming principles in the June 23rd report of the C.C. Little Hall Name Task Force and use the ranked recommendations from that report to provide an opportunity for community input, which, as I mentioned, this is part of. The task force will then use this input to submit 3 potential names for the replacement name on C.C. Little Hall. Are there any comments from the committee or any other information we want to partake before we start looking at the questions? All right. So one of the first questions I think I've already answered was what was the timeline and how that process will work. And the only part I don't know is when the community, the UMaine community or the public in general might expect a public announcement of a new name. I'm fairly sure that will rest with President Farini Monday and her staff as to when that might occur. The next question that came up was, does the president have the final say on a proposed new name for the building? That answer is both yes and no. Yes, she would be the one to present the name to the Board of Trustees, but the Board of Trustees ultimately has the final say on whether that name is approved. From a process perspective, I don't know if they then have the opportunity to substitute a name or not. But at the very least, any name that might be recommended by this committee and or President Farini Monday would have to be approved by the Board of Trustees. Another question that came out was, has the university reached out to the people of the Penobscot Nation? And I think the answer to that is yes, we have. There are a number of folks on this committee that represent not only Native American studies here at the university, but also Rena Newell, who could not be here today, is also on our committee. And we are taking also general input from anybody in the community who might want to provide it.
Kenda, I just want to make a comment that Rena is joining us via the YouTube. So she is live streaming with us here today.
Oh, wonderful. Glad to hear that. Thank you. One of the concerns we've heard both through the website and through the submission through the UMaine Alerts email is that we are erasing history through the removal of CC Little's name. And I want to assure everyone that the committee, both the first committee as well as the second one, has been very, very conscientious about not doing that. Whatever name might be selected to replace CC Little's name will not erase the years that CC Little's name has been on the building. And in fact, we look at this as a wonderful opportunity to educate the current as well as future generations about why the building was named for CC Little, how it came to be not named for CC Little, and why the new name, whatever name that is, has been selected, and that would be prominently part of the CC Little Hall, or what is called CC Little Hall now. And it is our intention not to in any way erase any of the history that has gone on before, but rather to expand on it and to inform, as I said, today's generation and future generations about how we came to the decision to rename CC Little Hall. And just as a side note, CC Little's name and portrait are not in any way being removed from the Hall of Presidents in the library. That was never under consideration.
Can I think perhaps John Diffenbacher-Krall, did you want to make a comment? I thought I saw your hand raised.
I wanted to reinforce what you were saying, Kenda. I would direct anyone who's viewing this session right now, if you haven't read the report of the CC Little Hall Name Task Force, I would direct you to page 9 under the heading Enriching the University Community's Sense of Place and Understanding of the Past. We wrote, we see it as critical that the Little Hall renaming process entail a permanent assessment of CC Little's career and an explanation of the reasons for the new name chosen to replace him on the building. So we would agree with the questioner. We do not want to erase history.
Thank you, John. Are there any other questions, or is there any other information we can share with those who are viewing the open forum today? I'll remind you that questions can be submitted to umaine.alerts@maine.edu or through the chat.
Also, I want to just mention, we talked about a link on the website for the report. I have put that link into the live stream chat.
Thank you.
I would also just like to thank some of the student groups that were involved with this. As part of the effort here, the effort came from a lot of different directions at once, but students definitely played a big role in getting this motion going in the first place. And so I'd just like to extend a thank you to the student body.
I think maybe if we're at a bit of a lull here, I'll just review a couple items that are in that June 23rd report that is accessible online. And I encourage anyone who's listening now to send us a question. We do welcome input, and we're interested to hear what the broader community thinks about this process. One of the things that the Summer Task Force discovered as we began to look into this was a surprising lack of guidance about how a name should be designated for a building or a site on campus. And so that was certainly one of the things that we were charged with, reflecting on what should be the criteria for such an evaluation. And that appears early in that June 23rd report on page 3. So what we propose there are fairly lofty standards of who should be the recipient of something like the public honor that goes with having a name associated with a location on a public land grant university. So I won't go into them in great detail, but I will just briefly tick off the 6 headings that we suggested provide useful guiding criteria for how a name might be selected. First, that they should have a pedagogical purpose. Second, that the university has an obligation of due diligence to think carefully about any proposed name. Third, that the university has an obligation to interpret and explain why a name is associated with a building. It shouldn't just be slapped on there and left alone, but should be something that is used effectively as a pedagogical tool. Fourth, that the university has a real commitment to people who are so honored, that it is not something we do lightly to reconsider the name of existing buildings on campus. Fifth, that we recognize that the study of history does involve revision and a changing understanding of what are the ideals of the university, and so that it can be appropriate to reconsider what was once considered an appropriate name. And then sixth and finally, we really call attention for ourselves really that the historical and institutional context in which time a name is identified is something that we need to be very sensitive to. And that in our own moment, we also will be judged by later generations. And so we really do enter into this process with a lot of care, trying to be as thoughtful as possible. And part of that is this public forum, as well as the related website where we have been collecting information and public comment to help guide us in this process. So that's a little bit about the sort of general principles that the summer task force discussed and put into its June report that is, again, available online, and we encourage anyone who's interested to take a look at it.
Thank you, Liam. I really appreciate that. And I also wanted to mention one other thing, and that is that in the FFT meeting that we attended last week, it became known that the policy, the board policy, is less than complete, or is vague in some ways. And so the work that the first task force did will likely serve as a template or a starting point for the board, who will be reviewing that policy after our process is completed, to provide more guidance for any future similar processes. But in a lot of ways, we are blazing new ground here for the University of Maine, as well as the University of Maine system. I did want to also mention that the website, where we are also collecting information and suggestions, will close on September 18th. September 18th is the last date that the website will be live. That will allow the task force to review all of the input that we have received at that point and use it as part of our considerations as we contemplate what we are going to recommend to President Farini Monday in our September 25th report. Don't see any new questions. Is there any other comments that the committee would like to share? I would invite those who might be listening to either share through the chat or through the UMaine Alerts email address or through the website. Liam very carefully outlined the 6 criteria that the first task force developed. If there's any additional thoughts about what those criteria should be, we would certainly like to entertain those ideas, as well as specific suggestions for new names for what is currently CC Little Hall. So I would invite folks to comment about the criteria as well. We can talk a little bit about the historical perspective. CC Little Hall has been CC Little Hall since the mid-60s. There was, in our research, not a lot of information from the board trustees meeting, which ratified that name, but the name is about 50 years old in terms of, maybe a little older, from a board of trustee policy, or excuse me, a decision back in, I believe it was 1966.
So, Kenda, there's a question in the chat. Would you like for me to read the question?
Please.
Sure. So the question says, I only skimmed the report, but wondered if there would be some kind of acknowledgement in the newly named building about its old name and why it was changed.
Absolutely. I think Liam talked about it. It's certainly part, I think it was on page 9 as John read it from the report as well, that absolutely the committee is very firm in its recommendation, and that will be reiterated in our September 25 report, that the educational opportunity is very key to this process, and to not only talk about how the building came to be named CC Little Hall and how and why it came to be named whatever the new name might be. So we believe that a prominent educational fixed permanent display, whatever that might look like, should be in the building and there for posterity to understand how we came to where we are today.
So we also have another question. And that question is, how are these 4 criteria developed and ranked? And
Actually,
then the other part of,
I think there are 6 criteria. And through discussion and research is how we ranked them. The University of Michigan went through a similar process, I think about 2 years ago. And so some of that work certainly informed our work. But the committee, and I don't know if anyone who was on the first committee wants to add to my comments, I welcome that. But that's basically how we came to the 6 ranked criteria that we produced in our our June 23rd report.
You know, I think part of our work this was the more challenging thing for that summer committee, coming up with suggestions for how to consider a new name. And that is really at the center of this, what I would call the fall task force. We're now sort of trying to figure out how best to come up with 3 recommendations for the president, who will then make her own recommendation that will go to the Board of Trustees. So our process began by trying to take stock of current names of buildings at the University of Maine. And we began with a UMaine webpage that lists 41 major buildings named after individuals. And the sort of breakdown of those existing names on campus, again, this is not 100% coverage, but it represents a sampling of what had been highlighted as major buildings on the campus. And what we found were that of those 41, 100% are named after people of European descent. 85% were named after men. 59% were named after UMaine administrators, although many of those had been faculty prior to becoming administrators. 39% were people with a UM degree. 27% were named after faculty, and 10% were named after a business person or a donor. So that gave us some sense of existing building names, and that informed how we thought about what would be an appropriate name to go on a renamed building should that go forward. And this led to a great deal of discussion in the task force, particularly about whether recommendations should be ranked, whether they should all be sort of co-equal. And in the end, we did come up with 4 ranked recommendations to the president for what we thought would be appropriate new names. And at the top of that list was, we recommended unanimously that the president consider a Penobscot and or Wabanaki name. And I think the reason for that is, there are a variety of reasons, but I think above all, the fact that the University of Maine is in the Wabanaki homeland and is adjacent to the Penobscot Nation makes this a particularly important thing to recognize. And we have had Wabanaki and Penobscot students and faculty and staff at the University of Maine for many, many years. And I think consistent with the recent memo of understanding that the university has entered with the Penobscot Nation, consistent with the recent UMaine land acknowledgement statement that really reflects on our presence on Marsh Island being part of the Penobscot homeland, that this represents an ongoing colonial situation, really brought that to the fore as the most significant way in which we could try to call attention to this very important aspect of UMaine history. So that was our top recommendation. And maybe I'll take a pause and see if others want to comment differently or add anything to that.
No, I think that was very well said, Liam. I appreciate that. Thank you.
We do have another question. It seems that there are 2 pathways for a building or space being named: honorary and a naming opportunity attached to a gift. Do the committee contemplate the differences between the 2?
I think in our ranked recommendations, we did include as our number 4 the opportunity, if there was one, to consider at least whether there was a financial contribution that could be made. I don't think that that was exclusive of anything other than it was a recognition of the need for the actual realistic need of, there's money to be had to obtain, to maintain any building. And if there was a way to, through this process, garner some funds to help with the maintenance of the building, that wasn't something we should overlook. But I don't know that anything more than that was really part of our consideration. At least that's how I looked at it. I don't know if John or Liam or Haley, if you had a different perspective.
So just to add to that, viewers may be aware, land-grant universities across the United States are struggling with how to maintain their infrastructure and have hundreds of millions of dollars in deferred capital expenditures. Maine is even worse than the median across the country. So, and that building was finished in the mid-1960s, can definitely use certain funds. So anyone can read the ranking, and we ranked that one number 4. But actually there could be an opportunity to do several things with a potential name, both a donor opportunity and to meet one of the groups that we recommended. So they're not exclusive of one another either.
Thank you. That's a good point.
Yeah,
We have another.
I'll just add
Go ahead.
a comment on this theme of the naming process and trying to be practical. And on the one hand, we have a set of guiding principles that are very idealistic and very lofty, and really say, this represents something of real significance to have a significant part of our campus named after a person. And we want to strive for those ideals. At the same time, we are cognizant of just the practical realities of the finances of higher education. And so I think it is important to balance issues about fundraising and being truthful and honoring donors whose generosity is really important to the past, present, and future of the University of Maine. And one other aspect of being practical in naming is that we, I think, have a sort of practical responsibility to consider renaming as a very necessary thing in the 21st century. The likelihood of the University of Maine adding lots of new buildings in the foreseeable future is very slight. So we have a relatively stable physical campus infrastructure. In some ways, it's more likely to shrink than to grow in the future. And so if we feel that those sort of statistics about the current named landscape of the university doesn't really match what our ideals and goals of the university are, we do have a responsibility to think carefully about how do we go forward to better align the very important physical landscape of campus with our ideals.
Well stated.
So we have some more questions, Kenda. How long will the new name be kept until the next change would come up?
That's a good question. I think that's history will tell. If history is a predictor of the future in any way, I can say it would probably be a long time before a name would be changed, because names haven't changed, building names haven't changed on campus, except through the more donor or contributor mechanism, as opposed to the other way. So that's my perspective. Folks can certainly disagree with me, but I would be surprised without a donor donating either to a new building or to an addition or to a renovation. I don't know that a building would be named. As Liam explained as well, there are very practical aspects to the maintenance and ongoing operation of our infrastructure. So that's my thought, but I'd be open to have anyone else on the committee make their comments as well.
Because Kenda, I would add though, if you look at the policy, it would not be time limited. So it would be in perpetuity.
That's true. Unless it's a donor or a lease kind of arrangement like it is with the New Balance names on campus. So like to say, for example, the New Balance Recreation Center, that's a lease. That was donor related.
So our next question is, did the task force learn any information on when the first Indigenous, Black, or Latinx students came to the University of Maine? Why is this not available information?
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know if there's anyone on the task force who knows the answer to the question.
I know one answer. So Native students first came in the 1930s, but there had been some students at UMaine unofficially, but there was an effort to bring some Native students and to encourage Penobscot and then Passamaquoddy students to come. So we do have a history of Native students here, almost 100-year history officially at UMaine. I can't speak to the other.
Thank you, Lisa.
I think one thing that has come up, particularly through the public comment website, is the name of Ada Viola Peters as a very early person of African descent who was a graduate of the University of Maine. And several people have identified her as the earliest Black student, but I'm not so certain that that's really been established definitively. So I don't think at the current time we know for certain.
I also cannot speak to why the information is not available. I'm sure it's available through various offices on campus, but I don't know that it's consolidated in one location without doing some searching for it.
So we have another question regarding the renaming recommendation. One to rename for a person of Penobscot Wabanaki descent. Is there any recommendation or thought to consult with the Penobscot tribe on a name? I think we've had this question before.
Yep.
The next question, are there any active efforts underway to court or attract a naming rights donor by any university office?
The Jeff Mills from the foundation is on our task force, and so as far as I know, the answer to that is not at the present. The priorities of that office are established, I think, by a combination of the president and the system and the chancellor. At least that's, I could be wrong about that, but I believe that's where the priorities in terms of courting a donor or courting fundraising, those priorities are established. So I don't know if that's one of the priorities, but that might be something we could find out.
So we do have another question. Have you considered a Wabanaki place name? Is there some words for a place where people dedicate themselves to inclusive thinking?
We did talk to some folks about whether there was an appropriate name that wasn't associated with a person's name. If there was a naming process that should be honored among the tribal representatives, and we did not find out that there was any such process, or didn't want to disrespect any process that might already be in place there. But in terms of the question specifically, the answer would be no, I don't think so. We did reach out to the chiefs to participate in this open forum, and we certainly reached out to the chiefs to alert them of the website and the opportunity for input.
But I'll just thank the person who made that comment. I think it's a valuable one, and that's part of what this forum is intended to do, to give us some more suggestions for the task force to go back and have our conversations and come up with 3 recommendations that will advance to the president. So thanks very much for that input.
I don't see any other questions. I don't know if there are any other comments, if there's any other information we could share that would be helpful. But as Liam said, we certainly welcome any of those sorts of comments about what the task force should do or consider as it considers in the next 2 weeks what recommendations to make to President Farini Monday. So I too thank the person who offered that comment, and all of those who have asked questions and offered comments. We thank you for those.
So we do have another question in the chat, several more. Should UMaine take into account the composition of building names on an interethnic level? It seems that most names are named after individuals of English or Anglo-Norman descent.
I think the short answer is yes. I think that was part of the work that the first task force did. And I think Liam talked a little bit about the sort of survey of names and how they came to be, or at least on the surface. And while that wasn't exhaustive, it was representative of the work that we did, which informed how we came up with our 4 ranked recommendations. So I think the short answer is absolutely.
So another question, to what extent, if any, will the committee's four ranked recommendations affect future naming processes of new university buildings?
Very good question. I think it will depend on the charge of that group in terms of, as the policy stands now, the president is responsible for commissioning a committee or task force to review the situation and come up with a recommendation, which is how we find ourselves here today. I would like to think that the work that our committees, both the first task force as well as the second one has done, has been considered and open and transparent as possible. So I would hope that our work would be at least consulted by any future task force, but I don't know that there's an obligation for them to necessarily do so at this point, unless what we have done becomes part of a new naming of facilities policy put out by the Board of Trustees.
I'll add, most of our conversation today has been about ethnic or racial identification of possible names. But the third of our four ranked choices was to point out that there really is a gender imbalance in how people are recognized on campus. And so I think that's also a very serious concern, that we do not have many, certainly not representative of the general population or the people on campus. So having a woman's name is also a really important consideration as we go forward and thinking about how do we better align our campus landscape with our values.
Excellent point.
I'd also add that the four ranked recommendations that we have could also be used as a starting place for other renaming committees if those arise. Like, it's obviously not like a complete list, not an exhaustive list of every ethnic or sexuality or anything like that. It would be a good starting point, especially for the University of Maine, where there is an extreme lack of diversity in our buildings' names. So I think it would be useful for the future, but it's obviously not inclusive of everything yet.
Thanks, Haley. Good point. Any other questions? We certainly would welcome the input. And as I mentioned before, just as a reminder, you can submit your questions to umaine.alerts@maine.edu, as well as through the chat. And again, our website is open for input through September 18th. So certainly invite you to submit as much. People are not limited at all in terms of how many times they can submit suggestions, both in terms of names or criteria or the process. We would welcome all of that input. Our charge does include consideration of community input, and so we certainly value all comments and thank everybody who's taken the time to do so.
I do want to mention, Kenda, that we did have one naming suggestion through the chat, and that is Turing Hall after Alan Turing.
We certainly will include that in our consideration. Thank you. Well, we will stay open for a few more minutes longer, just to make sure that if folks want to comment, that they still can. But if folks don't have any other questions or input, we certainly will remain as long as we can. But if there aren't any other inputs, again, I remind folks of the website where you can certainly put in as much suggestions and comments as you would like to do so.
I do just want to mention, Kendra, that there are some additional comments thanking the committee for its work and as well as for offering the public forum today. Thanks,
I appreciate that. The committee is taking its charge very seriously and has been diligently working. We started before the semester began and are trying to meet some fairly tight deadlines to actually affect the change that we think is appropriate. So we are not in any way trying to limit the input. So I appreciate that compliment.
So we do have another question similar to those asked before. How will you be vetting names?
Well, that's going to be the focus of our very next discussion because it will be, obviously, we've gotten a lot of community input and over 200 comments so far. Actually, I think it's actually closer to 250 or more. But so that's is it simply a volume or do we? And we also have the 6 criteria that we used as well as the priorities the 4 priorities that we listed in our report. So we will be amalgamating all of those and we will, as President Freeney Money has asked us to do, give pros and cons for each of our recommendations. But those would be the key factors that we would be looking at, the priorities that were recommended by the first task force in conjunction with the 6 criteria that we also identified in that first task force report. So it's looking at all of those things in the context of the public and open forum information and putting those all together. So the task force has a lot of good work to be done in its next several meetings. I did want to mention that the September Board of Trustees meeting does allow public comment. If you want to provide public comment about not only this agenda item or any agenda item, that you must email the board by Friday, September 25th to be on the schedule for public comment on the 28th. So I did want to mention that in case people were interested in public comment at the Board of Trustees meeting that's coming up. And to give you the email address to reserve your spot, if you would like to make public comment, you must email ums.trustees@maine.edu by 5:00 p.m. on Friday, September 25th. So if anyone is interested, feel free to do so, please. We'll wait a few more minutes to see if some more questions do come in or if some new folks join the forum. I want to thank everyone that has joined us so far and those on the committee and task force who have joined us today, and especially those who have helped us from a technology perspective. Sam Hallett and Margaret Nagel and Kimberly and Josette thank you so much for helping us today. Really, really, really do appreciate it.
And I just want to mention again that I have added to the chat a link to the report as well as a link to the website mentioned. And just to stress that you have until September 18th, as Kenda has mentioned earlier, for your input at that website.
Any new questions, Kimberly? We'll give it a few more minutes. And if there are
No, we don't have any new questions.
Okay. We'll wait another minute or so, and if not, then we'll close the open forum at this point, and thank everyone for their participation, and really encourage them to submit any information or suggestions they might have to us on our website.
We do have another suggestion for naming, and that is Dana Hall.
Thank you. I have to say that of the, like I said, more than 200 comments that we have had so far, they have been very, very thoughtful and very thorough and very varied. Really do appreciate the input. Has been very, very considered, and we really appreciate that.
Another suggestion, Donald Saktama, the most recognized of the Passamaquoddy, was the tribe's legislative representative to the state for 4 years, 1998 to 2002.
Excellent, thank you.
I can also add that he served on the Maine Indian Tribal State Commission.
Well, if I could sing, I'd sing a musical interlude, but I can't, so. I think at this point, we will go ahead and close the open forum. But again, I remind folks that the website is available through September 18th. If they want to make a comment, we would welcome to hear it. Thank you everyone who attended today, and thank you everyone from the committee that participated, as well as all of those folks in the background that certainly helped us get it on the YouTube and on the Zoom. I really appreciate Sam, Margaret, Josette, and Kimberly very, very much. Thank you. And
before we close, one more suggestion. Theodore Mitchell, founder of the Wabanaki Center and the Native Studies Program at the University of Maine.
Excellent, thank you. I think we'll close the forum at this point then, and I thank you all for participating, both the committee members as well as those who have joined us via YouTube. Thank you so much, and take good care now.